Hey everybody, Angsty here. So the thing I want to show you today is an atomizer, and it's a little bit wonky. In order to kind of figure that out, I want to give you a little bit of context. If you followed us for any amount of time, you know that I'm a tank guy. I love RTAs, and I have since my very first K-Fun. But I also love drippers. So that works great, fine. I never really got on with squonking. Because I don't really like unregulated so much historically, and I didn't really get on with the little 14 millimeter, squonking addies. And it wasn't until the beginning of this last year or the end of last where I got a hold of an RTA. And I just sort of fell in love with this as a dripper. And then I was given the opportunity to purchase an Art Mod Evo from Understudy. And when I paired a regulated small bottle in the right spot squonker with an atomizer that I loved, it kind of turned me into a squonker. So ever since then, I squonk like crazy. I absolutely adore it. But at the same time, I still like my RTAs. I just do. and I kind of miss them a little bit and whatever. And so I always kind of go back to them for a while and use them both at the same time, sometimes even. So there's that. The second part of this is August 8th. So we saw just a deluge of juice and mods and atomizers come out right trying to hit the August 8th date, and amongst that flood, there's one particular atomizer that kind of stood out to me, and it's called the Split by DNV, and this little guy stuck out in my mind because while in its basic function it's kind of like an auto dripper, right? You've got a coil, you've got some wicks that stick down into a small tank. And that's not in and of itself very interesting, but what is interesting about it is with a quick reconfigure, this thing can squonk. So it goes from an RTA if I want to use a non-squonking mod, and if I want to just flip it around and use it as a squonker, I can do that on one of my squonk mods now. And I feel like that's pretty cool. The shorts of it, the basics here, we've got 22 millimeters in diameter, 21 millimeters in height, not including the drip tip. So it's pretty tidy. It's not terribly big, so it looks good even on a tiny little mod like the fluid momentum here. So without going into too much detail, let's go up close and see what's going down. Welcome to the Uptight with the Split Atomizer by DNV. So here's our man of the hour. This is what you're after when you're after a split. Now, as I probably already mentioned, I got this thing because not only does it function as a nice little rebuildable tank that's super small, it also squonks. Optionally squonk, so you can run it as a tank, or you can squonk that tank and refill this little tiny tank with your bottom feeding mod. So if I wanted this to go on my Art Mod Evo, there you go. So you vape through your 1.3 mil tank, which it says 1.3. I don't even know if you get that much in there because by the time you put wicks in there, you don't even get that much. I think it's more like a 1 mil tank. But when you're done with it, squeeze, and boom, put your other mil back in your tank. So I mean that's cool, but you can also run it how I've been running it, which is on a regulated non-squonk mod, like this guy. This is the fluid momentum, and I think it looks pretty tight on there, especially with the drip tip. So let's start actually with that. So this is the way it comes. You can see, let's start from the top. You can see the wide bore chuff style drip tip. That is there because one of the selling points here is you can fill it from the top. So it's a tiny tank, but it's so easily fillable. Ostensibly, you can just take one of your needle nose guys and drop it down in here and fill it. The problem is I have found is I can't reliably get the normal tips that I actually prefer in the unicorn bottles. I can't get that to fit very well at all. So without taking off the top. So what I end up doing is taking the top off, putting it straight on the fill nozzle that way, squeezing it, and then going from there. Now that works fine. Or if you had it on your squonker, you can obviously just squonk on the side, fills it back up from the side, and I'll show you where that comes out in just a moment. So let's get this out of the way. Let me show you what the other option we've got here. So this 510 wide bore guy comes off with a lot of very fine threads, very good threads though, and it does come with a 510 adapter which threads back in the same spot. There we go. Let's throw a little Just Marie tab. Little JMK design. Ooh, looks pretty solid. I like it. So what I've been doing is just popping this guy off and filling from the top. Works well. No muss, no fuss. Now let's not get too carried away here without talking about one of the things that I really don't like about this atomizer. So the top cap here, we've got our airflow slot here and an airflow slot right there. Plenty of air. It looks like more than there is, so even if you've got it wide open, it works fine. Here's the problem. In order to adjust that, we've got this little ring, and this little ring isn't really attached to anything. It just sort of press fits in there on like a little O-ring, and it works, but you'll notice where it is. It is on the inside of the cap. There is no way to externally adjust this airflow ring from the outside. So what you kind of have to do, once you get it kind of seated back down in there, there we go, is catch a fingernail on that little slot, and there you go. Now you can adjust it. So we're fully open, there's fully closed on both sides. And if we want to open it back up again, let's find that little groove. You get the point. It's annoying. You have to take the thing off and get your finger all liquidy and slippery, and then find a way to clean back off. I don't like that design. Now, that said, typically I'm going to put it somewhere and leave it, right? So maybe not a big deal for you, but something I definitely wanted to mention. So let's put that to the side and come back to the atomizer itself. Now, this guy is a pretty standard, if you will, looking dual coil setup, and it works pretty well. It's an easy build because we've got spots, 2 different spots for our 2 different positive leads if we're making a dual coil, and obviously we can just run it single as well. Our negatives are milled into the deck there, and our positive block is obviously the same on both sides. So one thing I wanted to mention here that is, I wouldn't say this is a con, it's just a thing, right? It's just a thing to know. These positive screws on the top are small. I've got an iFixit kit, and this is the 1 millimeter. This is the 1 millimeter, and it's just about the right size. So I mean, these things are really, really tiny. I would make sure that you've got a super tiny. This is the smallest one out of a jeweler's kind of micro screwdriver set, and normally this looks really small until you start looking at these, and these things make this tiny little screwdriver look huge. You can use this guy for them. It is tight, but you can kind of get it pressed down there just a little bit. I've actually found in a pinch, I was trying to rebuild with a knife blade. I was like, okay, I'm just going to ruin my edge and just get this thing built, and I couldn't do it because the knife blade itself was just so thick. Even though the edge went in, as soon as it swelled out to the rest of the bevel, it was too thick. All right, so that's what I did want to show you those things. Now, we have got spaces, obviously, for 2 coils. We've got 2 3.5 millimeter holes for each one of your coils. For the wicks, rather, to go in, and I will say that they also include this little Viton blocker that goes in either side to block off 2 of those holes, so you can run it single coil, and that's pretty cool. I kind of dig it. It works pretty well as a chamber reducer as well. Real quick, if you notice the top, you see how they're kind of cut at a straight angle here. Here, that's because when I got it, it was kind of squared off, and when I went to go put the top cap on, it wasn't wanting to stay down. It would always kind of go pull one of those numbers and just kind of be slightly squint like that. So I took it off and I was like, oh wait, what's these little corners that are pushing in there? So I got my snips and cut them off. So you may have to do that as well, I don't know. But I did. I had a little bit of hangy-offy action going on in there. Oh Lord. That's something that Cisco's going to make fun of me for. Oh well. So there is that. So I wanted to mention that. The other thing that I did want to mention is you can fully disassemble this guy. So if you want to run this in Squonk mode, this is also applicable. You're going to drop this bottom pin out, just normal threads, and at the top your positive block can slide right out, and then you can pull this whole bit apart. You can get the tank off if you need some like serious cleaning. That's how you do it. And also I will show you there in the tank, if you look down that, see the little hole right here? That's where your liquid comes when you fill from the top or when you squonk from the bottom. It comes out of that little hole, and then there's another one matches on the other side. Pretty slick. Pretty slick little addy. Alright, let's get a coil up in this thing. It has been coiled. Alright, so we've got one of my normal builds in here, which is a 9-wrap, 3 millimeter, 27 gauge. And we've gone 3 millimeter because, again, we've got these 3.5 millimeter wick holes, and you want to make sure that we're filling all those things up. And I'm going to show you the wicking that we normally do, that I normally do on here. And the reason is because the length also matters. Not only do you want enough cotton to fill those 2 channels, you also want to have the right length. So I'm going to use some Shadow because, well, I feel like it's the best stuff on the market still. And we're going to get this thing through like we do with any other addy. Except for you are not going to have to do it on camera. So you might not ham-fist it quite as much as I do. All right, so we actually need a pretty short piece of cotton, because what we're going to do is we're going to get down to the tank, but I want it maybe about halfway down. I have found that the wicking seems to work better when you have a shorter wick, and to be honest, it shouldn't matter, because when I vape, I don't know about you, when I vape, I tilt. So when I point the drip tip at my face, we're already going to be running, you know, the juice that's left is going to be running all over the place, and you shouldn't have a problem with any wicking. I don't. So we're going to nip off our little rolled up bit. And then we're going to tidy up our sides. And we're going to grasp one side of our wick, rotate, and push down gently, push down into our wick hole. Now again, we've got those tiny little weep holes here, right? And remember, when we do have these things sealed off, the tank itself isn't sealed, because we've got these little venting holes. So on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grasp, turn, and cram it in, so to speak. Again, not cramming. We want to keep everything nice and fluffy, but cramming sounds better than gently inserting. Oh yeah. All right, there we go. You can see we're about halfway down our tank. Just peeking in there. And remember, this tank is only 1.4 mil, supposedly. By the time you put wicks in there, it's probably more like 1.1 or 1.1 milliliters, but so we don't have a big tank anyway, so it's going to be wicking just fine. You can see it's already starting to pull up some liquid that I already had here in the tank. Now, one thing I don't know that I mentioned, so I want to mention it again really quickly. When you put this in a squonking mode, you replace the bottom positive pin. We do have another included threaded screw that goes right down in your fill hole, so that way you never have to worry about over squonking and it comes up here. It's only going to hit your fill holes right down there in the tank. All right, so now that we've got that going, let's go ahead and help our capillary action by filling the other side pretty well, since our tank isn't full, so it's not doing it automatically. I'm putting a get pissed on there because, well, I found it works well in here. And, you know, you probably noticed this as well, but I noticed a long time ago that certain atomizers do certain liquids best. And while my normal ADV is abolishment, in this particular one, this particular atomizer, I like piston it. So I'm going to go ahead and fill, and you do have to get a good press here, and I will try to do it. There we go. You can see it filling up there, and you'll see it start to kind of burble here, and that's going to be really hard to get on camera. There you go. You can see it right there. And that means you're now out of air, right? The air has been displaced. We pretty much just have liquid in there. So that's good. And doing it on camera there, I may have gotten a little too much. We'll go ahead and vent that off here. Yeah, looking pretty good, actually. With my ceiling fan going. This is a pretty solid build. All right, our airflow, we've already got that dialed in. You can see I've got a little bit of a window there. And this side is going to be wide open. Going to line up our air slot and our coil. Bam. All right, let's go have a vape. Welcome back. So that was the split by DNV. Overall, my summary has to be, this is a fun, interesting sort of atomizer, and I kind of really like using it. But a few pros and cons for you. The big one is it's obviously a RTA or bottom feeding atomizer. I think that's a really solid, interesting sort of thing for an atty to be. And I don't know that there's a whole lot of them like that out there. I don't know that I can even name one off the top of my head. But it's pretty freaking sweet. And also the bottom feeding pin comes with it. Now, several of the really good drippers lately have had bottom feeding pins available. You often have to find or purchase them separate. The fact that this comes with it, pretty awesome. The super easy refill is pretty awesome. You know, in my opinion, dropping this cap off and just squeezing it, you know, straight into the top, it works really, really well. Or squonking, obviously, is even easier to refill this thing. That to me is a pretty awesome pro. Pretty awesome pro. The flavor isn't the best that I've tried, but it is really rather good. I've had some more flavorful, you know, very expensive atomizers. This would compete with most of them. This is a very solid, better than the Pico. That's for damn sure. I did not really care for the Pico's flavor. What the Pico brought to the table was a small form factor, like this does, and this tastes better. So there you go. It's dual coil or single coil, and single coil is not an afterthought. They even include the chamber reducer to plug off the other wick holes. So it's clearly designed to be single coil. In fact, that's usually the way I'm running it personally. The wide bore tip and the 510 tip adapter that come with it, to me, is another big pro. It's one thing to have, the wide bore big airy thing if that's the way you like to roll, but I really like the fact that we can also put a regular drip tip on it, because some people, including me, really like the normal drip tips. We find that it concentrates flavor a little bit better than the wide open guys. The tank itself is Pyrex, so that way if you like the tank crackers, it's not going to be cracking your tank. And the fact that it's very small, like I mentioned, the Pico, what it brought to the table was it was very small. This one is very similar in that it's very tidy. It looks good even on my preferred normal mods are usually quite tiny, and this thing looks good on all of them. I mean, some of my favorite tanks, like the K-Fun 5, it's a great tank, but when you put that thing on here and it's like that tall, it looks a little funny. That's all there is to it. It just looks a little funny, and this one does not. So the cons, the tank is 1.3 milliliters. That's not much juice, especially once you put wicks in there and it displaces some of that juice out. You don't even get that much out of there. So it's like a 1.1 milliliter tank. You can go through that pretty quickly, especially in dual coil mode. So that's a thing. It's easily refillable, but a small tank. Easily refillable, small tank. Yeah, that's that balance you got to kind of work with. The airflow adjustment it's bad design. That's all there's to it. In my opinion, it is not a good design. The fact that I have to take this off and monkey around with a ring on the inside of the top cap, it's obnoxious. I don't adjust my airflow often, granted, but at the same time, when I do, I don't like to have to do that. So those are pros and cons. Just a couple more things that I wanted to kind of let you know about. It does need to be wicked properly, as we talked about before. Those 3.5 millimeter holes on either side of the coil need to be able to block the juice, because otherwise you lay it on the side or put it in your pocket, you're going to get a little drain and out of there, and that's never happy. It claims to be able to be refilled without taking anything off. I have not found that to be the case unless you happen to have a syringe with you, or one of those really old unicorn bottles with a super long, skinny nozzle on there, tip on that nozzle. Most of I just don't find that to be accurate. So you definitely need to pull this thing off, and you have to do so anyway with the regular drip tip adapter on there anyway. And then the last thing is that it is $160. It's not cheap. I've paid more, but it's not cheap. That said, the things that I've paid $160 for before weren't top or bottom fed atomizers. So, do what you're going to do with that. It's not horrific. It's not obscene. It's also not cheap. So there it is. That's the Split by DNV, and I think it's a pretty good thing. Y'all take it easy. See you. And so you now plugged it up here, and then now you're feeding from down there. The same balls. Ah! Blooper reel. The same holes down here in the tank are the same ones you use